Sarah Martinez had always been the smallest person in any room she entered. At 5 feet 2 inches and barely weighing 110 pounds, she looked more like a college student than a trained military operative. Her fellow soldiers often joked that a strong wind could knock her over, and during basic training, drill sergeants had questioned whether she belonged in the army at all. But Sarah had something that couldn't be measured by height or weight. She had grown up in the roughest neighborhood in Detroit, where survival meant being smarter, faster, and more determined than everyone else. Her father had abandoned the family when she was 8, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone while working 2 jobs. Sarah learned early that size didn't matter if you had the will to fight. The army had been her escape route from poverty, but it quickly became something more. She discovered she had natural instincts for strategy and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. While other recruits panicked during combat simulations, Sarah's heart rate barely increased. Her instructors noticed this unusual trait, but most of her fellow soldiers saw only a quiet girl who kept to herself. Sarah's unit, the 82nd Airborne Division, had been deployed to a volatile region in Eastern Europe, where tensions between local forces and international peacekeepers had reached a breaking point. Their mission was supposed to be routine: provide security for humanitarian aid distribution in a war-torn city, where civilians were caught between rival factions. The city of Kozlov had once been home to nearly 500,000 people, but years of conflict had reduced it to a shadow of its former self. Bombed-out buildings lined empty streets, and the few remaining residents moved like ghosts through the rubble. Sarah's company had set up a temporary base in an abandoned school on the outskirts of the city, from where they coordinated supply runs and maintained communication with command headquarters. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison commanded the operation with military precision, but even he couldn't hide his concern about the deteriorating situation. Intelligence reports suggested that enemy forces were planning something significant, but the details remained unclear. What they did know was that several aid workers had gone missing in recent weeks, and local contacts had stopped responding to communications. Sarah spent most of her time on perimeter duty, which suited her preference for solitude. She had developed an almost encyclopedic knowledge of the surrounding terrain, memorizing every alley, rooftop, and potential hiding spot within a 2-mile radius of their base. Her fellow soldiers appreciated her thoroughness, even if they didn't fully understand her intense focus on details that seemed unimportant to them. During quiet moments, Sarah would study satellite images and street maps, creating mental models of potential threat scenarios. She had taught herself to think like an enemy combatant, anticipating where she would position snipers or plant explosives if she were planning an attack. This habit had started as a way to pass time, but it would soon prove to be far more valuable than anyone could have imagined. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Sergeant Mike Thompson failed to check in from his patrol. Thompson was a 15-year veteran who never missed a scheduled communication, and his silence immediately set off alarm bells throughout the base. Within minutes, Morrison had organized search teams and established emergency protocols, but something in the air felt different that morning. Sarah was assigned to Alpha Team, led by Captain Rodriguez, a seasoned officer who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. The team consisted of 8 soldiers, including Sarah, and their mission was to investigate Thompson's last known position, near the Central Market District. As they prepared their equipment and checked their weapons, Sarah noticed unusual activity in the distance. Through her binoculars, she observed people moving through the streets in patterns that seemed coordinated rather than random. Normal civilian movement in the war-torn city was typically hurried and purposeful, with people trying to complete essential tasks while minimizing their exposure to danger. But what she was seeing looked more like tactical positioning, with individuals taking cover behind specific buildings and maintaining visual contact with each other. When Sarah reported her observations to Captain Rodriguez, he initially dismissed her concerns as paranoia. The area had been relatively quiet for weeks, and intelligence reports hadn't indicated any imminent threats. But Sarah's instincts were screaming that something was wrong, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a carefully prepared trap. As Alpha Team moved through the abandoned streets toward Thompson's last known position, Sarah maintained constant surveillance of their surroundings. Her training had taught her to identify potential ambush points and escape routes, but her street-smart upbringing had given her an additional layer of awareness that military manuals couldn't teach. She could feel hostile eyes watching their every move. The Central Market District had once been the heart of Kozlov's commercial life, with dozens of small shops and restaurants serving the local community. Now it was a maze of collapsed buildings and debris-filled streets that provided countless hiding spots for anyone with hostile intentions. Sarah counted at least 12 positions where snipers could operate effectively, and 3 main routes that enemy forces could use to surround and isolate her team. When they reached the coordinates of Thompson's last communication, they found his radio lying in the middle of an intersection, its antenna broken and battery dead. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no indication of what had happened to the missing sergeant. The scene felt staged, as if someone wanted them to find the radio in that exact spot. Captain Rodriguez ordered the team to establish a defensive perimeter while he radioed their situation back to base. Sarah positioned herself behind a concrete barrier that provided good sight lines in multiple directions, her rifle ready and her senses on high alert. That's when she spotted the first hostile operative moving between buildings, approximately 200 meters to their east. The figure was dressed in civilian clothing but moved with military precision, carrying what appeared to be an assault rifle and communicating with unseen companions through hand signals. Sarah immediately reported the sighting to Rodriguez, who ordered the team to prepare for potential contact, while he called for immediate extraction. But as Sarah continued her surveillance, she realized that extraction might not be possible. She had identified at least 6 hostile operatives in various positions around the market district, and their movements suggested they were implementing a carefully planned encirclement strategy. Alpha Team was outnumbered and potentially surrounded, with limited ammunition and no immediate backup available. The radio crackled with Morrison's voice from base command, informing Rodriguez that all other teams were engaged with separate incidents throughout the city. It appeared that Thompson's disappearance had been part of a coordinated attack designed to spread the peacekeeping forces thin and create opportunities for ambush operations. Alpha Team was on their own, at least for the immediate future. As Sarah processed this information, her mind automatically shifted into survival mode. She began calculating distances, ammunition counts, and potential tactical advantages with the cold efficiency that had kept her alive on Detroit's dangerous streets. Her fellow soldiers were brave and well-trained, but most of them had never faced a situation where retreat was impossible and reinforcements weren't coming. The first shots rang out at exactly 1,347 hours, shattering the afternoon silence and confirming Sarah's worst fears. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions simultaneously, indicating that the enemy had been waiting for the perfect moment to spring their trap. Alpha Team found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire with nowhere to run and limited options for survival. The moment bullets started flying, Sarah's world shifted into sharp focus. While her teammates scrambled for better cover amid the chaos of automatic gunfire, she remained perfectly still behind her concrete barrier, counting muzzle flashes and calculating angles with mathematical precision. Her breathing stayed controlled, her hands steady on her rifle, as if the deadly situation was just another training exercise. Captain Rodriguez shouted orders over the deafening noise, directing his men to return fire and establish a defensive formation. Private Johnson took a bullet in the shoulder within the first 30 seconds, his scream of pain cutting through the gunfire as Corporal Williams dragged him to safety behind an overturned vehicle. The team was pinned down, outgunned, and running low on options. Sarah identified 8 distinct firing positions surrounding their location. 3 snipers had elevated positions on nearby rooftops. 2 machine gun teams controlled the main escape routes, and at least 3 rifle teams were advancing through ground-level positions to close the trap. Standard military doctrine would suggest calling for artillery support or air cover, but neither option was available in their current situation. Through her rifle scope, Sarah studied the enemy's movements with the patience of a hunter. She noticed that the hostile operatives were using a rotation system, with some providing covering fire while others moved to new positions. This suggested professional military training rather than irregular militia tactics, which meant they were facing a much more dangerous opponent than intelligence reports had indicated. Private Martinez, no relation to Sarah despite sharing a surname, panicked and broke cover to run toward what he thought was a safer position. Two enemy snipers immediately targeted him, their bullets kicking up concrete dust around his feet as he dove behind a pile of rubble. The near miss seemed to break something inside him, and he began firing wildly in random directions, wasting precious ammunition on targets he couldn't even see. Sarah made her first kill shot at 1,349 hours. One of the rooftop snipers had exposed himself while repositioning, presenting a clear target for exactly 2.3 seconds. Her bullet traveled 240 meters and struck him center mass, sending his body tumbling from the 3-story building. The remaining enemy operatives immediately recognized that Alpha Team had a skilled marksman among them, and their tactics shifted accordingly. Captain Rodriguez crawled over to Sarah's position during a brief lull in the gunfire. His face was grim as he assessed their deteriorating situation. 2 men were wounded, ammunition was running low, and enemy forces were systematically eliminating their defensive advantages. He asked Sarah for her assessment, knowing that her detailed knowledge of the surrounding area might reveal options that weren't obvious to the rest of the team. Sarah had been mentally mapping every enemy position since the firefight began. She explained to Rodriguez that the hostile operatives were implementing a classic encirclement strategy, but they had made one critical error. Their positioning left a narrow gap in their coverage, approximately 70 meters to the southwest, near a collapsed bakery that most people would dismiss as impassable terrain. The gap existed because enemy commanders had assumed that the rubble pile was too unstable and exposed to serve as an escape route. But Sarah had explored that area during previous patrols and knew there was a structural beam beneath the debris that could support a person's weight. More importantly, the angle of the collapsed walls would provide concealment from the enemy positions while allowing movement toward a building complex that offered multiple exit options. Rodriguez shook his head when Sarah described her plan. The route she proposed would require crossing 40 meters of open ground under enemy fire, followed by a dangerous climb through unstable debris. Even if someone managed to reach the collapsed bakery alive, there was no guarantee that the structural beam would hold their weight or that the concealment would be adequate to avoid detection. But Sarah had already moved beyond the theoretical stage. She had identified the specific sequence of movements required to minimize exposure time, calculated the optimal timing based on enemy firing patterns, and determined that the mission had approximately 8 minutes before hostile forces completed their encirclement. After that point, escape would become impossible, and the entire team would be either killed or captured. The second kill came at 1,352 hours, when an enemy machine gunner made the mistake of maintaining his position too long while providing covering fire for advancing team members. Sarah had been tracking his muzzle flashes and had determined his exact location behind a concrete wall that offered concealment but not true cover. Her armor-piercing round penetrated the wall and found its target, silencing the heavy weapon that had been preventing Alpha Team from repositioning. Corporal Williams had been observing Sarah's performance with growing amazement. In 20 minutes of intense combat, she had remained completely calm while accurately engaging targets that other team members couldn't even locate. Her shooting was precise and economical, with each bullet serving a specific tactical purpose rather than simply returning fire for psychological comfort. The enemy response to losing their machine gun position was swift and aggressive. 3 hostile operatives began moving through the ground-level positions in a coordinated advance designed to overrun Alpha Team's defensive perimeter. They used smoke grenades to obscure their approach and maintained constant communication through tactical radios, indicating professional military coordination. Sarah tracked their movement through the smoke by listening to their footsteps and watching for muzzle flashes during brief firing bursts. She realized that the advancing team was following a textbook urban warfare approach that would bring them to Alpha Team's position in approximately 4 minutes. Standard defensive procedures would involve falling back to a secondary position, but their current location was already the best available cover in the immediate area. Instead of retreating, Sarah did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She began moving laterally along their defensive line, using micro-terrain features and debris piles to maintain concealment while repositioning for better firing angles. Her movements were quick and purposeful, like a chess player executing a predetermined strategy that opponents couldn't anticipate. The third kill occurred when Sarah flanked the advancing enemy team and caught them by surprise from an angle they hadn't expected. Her position allowed her to engage two targets in rapid succession, dropping both operatives before their companions could react. The surviving member of the advance team immediately retreated to a more defensible position, buying Alpha Team precious time to reorganize their defense. Captain Rodriguez began to see possibilities he hadn't considered before. Sarah's unconventional tactics were disrupting enemy plans and creating opportunities that traditional defensive strategies couldn't achieve. He made the decision to give her tactical control over the team's positioning while he maintained overall command authority and communication with base headquarters. Sarah's fourth and fifth kills came during a coordinated enemy assault that was designed to overwhelm Alpha Team through superior numbers and firepower. Two separate teams attacked simultaneously from different directions, forcing the defenders to split their attention and resources. But Sarah had anticipated this possibility and had already identified the optimal sequence for engaging multiple targets in rapid succession. Her first target was an enemy sniper who was providing overwatch for the advancing assault teams. Sarah's bullet traveled 180 meters and struck him in the head, eliminating the threat before he could effectively support the ground assault. Without sniper cover, the advancing teams lost a critical tactical advantage and became more vulnerable to defensive fire from Alpha Team's remaining members. The fifth target was an enemy team leader, who was coordinating the assault through radio communications and hand signals. Sarah recognized his importance based on his positioning and behavior patterns, and realized that eliminating him would disrupt enemy coordination during the critical phase of their attack. Her shot was more challenging due to partial concealment, but it found its mark and immediately caused confusion among the surviving hostile operatives. By 13:58 hours, the tactical situation had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a carefully planned ambush was becoming a chaotic firefight, where enemy forces were reacting to Alpha Team's actions rather than implementing their own strategy. Sarah had eliminated 5 hostile operatives in 9 minutes, disrupting enemy plans and creating breathing room for her teammates to reorganize their defense. Private Johnson, despite his shoulder wound, had managed to establish communication with base headquarters and was providing regular updates on their situation. Morrison was coordinating a relief operation, but the earliest arrival time for reinforcements was still 15 minutes away. Alpha Team needed to survive that long while continuing to degrade enemy capabilities and maintain their defensive position. Sarah's sixth kill came when she identified an enemy operative attempting to establish a new sniper position on a partially collapsed building. The target was moving carefully and maintaining good concealment discipline, but Sarah had learned to recognize the subtle signs that distinguished military personnel from civilian survivors. Her shot prevented the establishment of a new threat position and further reduced enemy capabilities. The remaining hostile operatives began showing signs of uncertainty and decreased coordination. Their original plan had called for overwhelming Alpha Team through superior numbers and positioning, but Sarah's accurate shooting had eliminated key personnel and disrupted their tactical advantage. Some enemy personnel began withdrawing from advanced positions, suggesting that their commanders were reconsidering their approach to the engagement. At 1,359 hours, exactly 12 minutes after the ambush began, Sarah spotted the final 2 enemy operatives attempting to escape through what they believed was a concealed route behind the market district. These were likely the field commanders who had been directing the entire operation from a command position that provided good visibility but limited direct fire capability. Sarah understood that allowing enemy commanders to escape would compromise future operations and potentially endanger other peacekeeping teams throughout the city. Intelligence gathered from captured or eliminated enemy personnel had proven invaluable in previous conflicts, but dead commanders could still provide tactical information through equipment and documentation found on their bodies. The shooting angle for her 7th target required Sarah to expose herself briefly while moving to a position that offered a clear line of sight. She calculated that the risk was acceptable because remaining enemy operatives were either wounded, retreating, or focused on their own escape rather than maintaining overwatch for advancing teammates. Her bullet caught the first fleeing commander center mass at a range of 290 meters, the longest shot of the engagement. The impact sent him sprawling behind a pile of concrete rubble, where he remained motionless, either dead or critically wounded. His companion immediately changed direction and began moving more erratically, using smoke grenades and debris piles to obscure his escape route. The eighth and final target presented the most challenging shot of the entire engagement. The surviving enemy commander was moving through partial concealment at an estimated range of 340 meters, using terrain features and building shadows to minimize his exposure time. Sarah had approximately 30 seconds before he would reach a position that offered complete concealment and multiple escape routes. Sarah steadied her breathing and calculated wind speed based on debris movement and smoke patterns from the earlier grenades. Her target was moving at an irregular pace, sometimes pausing behind cover for several seconds before sprinting to the next position. She needed to predict not only his location but also the precise moment when he would be exposed long enough for an accurate shot. The final shot came at exactly 1,359 hours and 43 seconds. Sarah's bullet traveled through morning air that carried the smell of concrete dust and gunpowder, covering 340 meters in less than half a second. The target had just emerged from behind a collapsed wall section when the round found him, spinning him around before he collapsed near what had once been the entrance to a small grocery store. Sudden silence fell over the market district like a heavy blanket. After 12 minutes of intense gunfire, explosions, and shouted orders, the absence of sound felt almost unnatural. Alpha team members remained in their defensive positions for several additional minutes, weapons ready and senses alert for any signs of remaining enemy activity. Captain Rodriguez was the first to break the silence, calling for a systematic sweep of the engagement area to confirm that all hostile threats had been eliminated. Sarah provided overwatch while other team members moved carefully through the positions where enemy operatives had fallen, checking for survivors and collecting intelligence materials. The sweep confirmed what Sarah already knew from her observations during the engagement. 8 enemy operatives were dead, with no wounded survivors requiring medical attention or presenting security risks. The attackers had been carrying professional military equipment, including encrypted radio gear, tactical maps marked with peacekeeping force positions, and documentation suggesting connections to regional separatist organizations. Private Johnson's shoulder wound required immediate medical attention, but he remained conscious and alert throughout the evacuation process. Corporal Williams had sustained minor injuries from concrete fragments, and Private Martinez was showing signs of combat stress that would require psychological evaluation. Overall, Alpha Team had survived an overwhelming ambush with minimal casualties. Word of the engagement spread quickly through the peacekeeping force communication network. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison arrived with the relief convoy 22 minutes after the initial attack, expecting to find casualties and defensive positions overrun by superior enemy forces. Instead, he discovered Alpha Team in complete control of the situation, with 8 confirmed enemy kills and significant intelligence materials captured. Sarah's performance during the engagement became the subject of immediate analysis by military intelligence officers. In 12 minutes of combat, she had eliminated 8 enemy operatives with 8 shots, disrupted a carefully planned ambush operation, and prevented what could have been a devastating loss of peacekeeping personnel and equipment. The captured intelligence materials revealed that Thompson had been taken alive and was being held at a location approximately 6 kilometers from the market district. His capture had been intended to draw peacekeeping teams into prepared ambush positions, where enemy forces could inflict maximum casualties using superior numbers and positioning advantages. Sarah's accurate shooting had not only saved Alpha Team, but had also prevented enemy forces from implementing a broader strategy designed to undermine peacekeeping operations throughout the region. The elimination of key enemy personnel disrupted command structures and forced hostile organizations to reconsider their tactical approaches to engaging international forces. Morrison personally debriefed Sarah about her performance during the engagement, seeking to understand how a relatively inexperienced soldier had managed to achieve such remarkable results under extreme pressure. Her explanation was characteristically direct and free of unnecessary drama or self-promotion. She described her tactical analysis of enemy positions, her assessment of their movement patterns and coordination methods, and her calculation of optimal engagement sequences based on available ammunition and time constraints. To Sarah, the entire engagement had been a problem-solving exercise that required applying military training to a specific set of tactical challenges. What Morrison found most impressive was Sarah's emotional stability throughout the debriefing process. She showed no signs of combat stress, post-traumatic reaction, or psychological disturbance that typically affected soldiers after their first major engagement. Her recollection of events was precise and detailed, suggesting that she had maintained full situational awareness even during the most intense moments of the firefight. The rescue operation to recover Sergeant Thompson was launched 6 hours later, using intelligence gathered from the eliminated enemy operatives. Sarah volunteered for the mission despite Morrison's initial reluctance to deploy her again so soon after such an intense combat experience. Her knowledge of enemy tactics and her proven ability to remain calm under pressure made her valuable for the rescue operation. Thompson was recovered alive but wounded, having been tortured for information about peacekeeping force capabilities and deployment schedules. His rescue prevented enemy forces from gathering critical intelligence that could have been used to plan additional attacks against international personnel throughout the region. Sarah's actions during the Market District engagement earned her immediate promotion and recognition from military leadership at multiple levels of command. More importantly, her performance established new tactical protocols for dealing with ambush situations in urban environments where traditional military advantages might not apply. The story of the small soldier who eliminated 8 enemy operatives in 12 minutes became legendary among peacekeeping forces. But Sarah herself remained largely uninterested in the attention her actions had generated. She continued performing her assigned duties with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her service before the engagement. Years later, military analysts would study the Market District engagement as an example of how individual soldiers could adapt classical military training to unconventional tactical situations. Sarah's success had resulted from combining formal military education with street-smart survival instincts and an unusual ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. But for Sarah Martinez, the engagement had simply been another day of doing her job in a dangerous part of the world. She had faced a life-threatening situation, applied her training and instincts to solve the problem, and helped ensure that her teammates returned home safely to their families. In her mind, that was what being a soldier was supposed to mean. The small woman from Detroit, who nobody expected much from, had proven that courage and skill weren't measured by physical size or appearance. Sometimes the most unlikely people turned out to be exactly what the situation required. And sometimes the quiet ones who kept to themselves were the ones you wanted beside you when everything went wrong.